Happiness. Reconsidered. How Aquinas perfected Aristotle's ethics. When Thomas Aquinas turns to Aristotle, he does not treat him as a relic of the pagan past, nor does he merely repeat Aristotle's ideas with Christian language added on top. Instead, Aquinas treats Aristotle as a philosopher who came astonishingly close to the truth about human life, close enough that his philosophy could be completed rather than discarded. Tonight, I want to explore how Aquinas develops Aristotle, especially in answering two fundamental questions. What is the purpose of human life, and how do we become moral persons? In doing so, Aquinas preserves Aristotle's insights about virtue and reason, while expanding them into a fuller account of human purpose, moral growth, and ultimate fulfillment. Let us begin with Aristotle. Aristotle famously begins the Nicomachean Ethics by saying that every action aims at some good. Human life, taken as a whole, must therefore aim at a highest good, a final end, for the sake of which everything else is done. Aristotle calls this end eudaimonia, often translated as happiness or flourishing. For Aristotle, happiness is not a feeling. It is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, lived over a complete life. In other words, a good human life is one where reason governs desire, habits are shaped by virtue, and actions consistently reflect excellence of character. Aquinas accepts almost all of this. He agrees that human beings are teleological creatures, beings ordered toward an end. He agrees that reason plays a central role in moral life, and he agrees that virtue is acquired through habit, discipline, and repeated action. But Aquinas sees a problem. Aristotle correctly identifies that happiness is the final end of human life, but he underestimates what the human heart actually desires. Aquinas says, quote, "It is impossible for man's happiness to consist in any created good." End quote. Why? Because the human will is ordered toward the universal good, not partial goods. Wealth, honor, pleasure, and even moral excellence are all finite. They can satisfy us partially, temporarily, or conditionally, but never completely. Here, Aquinas develops Aristotle's idea of purpose by completing it. Aristotle identifies the structure of human desire, but Aquinas identifies its ultimate object. For Aquinas, the true end of human life, what he calls beatitude, is not merely virtuous activity, but union with the highest good itself. Aquinas says, quote, "Final and perfect happiness can consist in nothing else than the vision of the divine essence." End quote. This is not a rejection of Aristotle. It is a fulfillment of him. Aristotle was right that happiness involves the activity of reason. Aquinas agrees, but argues that reason reaches its completion not in contemplating abstract truths, but in contemplating God, who is truth itself. Now, let us turn to virtue. Aristotle famously describes moral virtue as a mean between extremes, discovered by reason and developed through habit. Courage, for example, stands between cowardice and recklessness. Temperance stands between self-indulgence and insensibility. Aquinas adopts this framework almost entirely. He agrees that virtues are stable dispositions that shape our actions, emotions, and desires. He agrees that we become virtuous by repeatedly choosing good actions until they become second nature. Aquinas says, quote, "Virtue denotes a certain perfection of a power." End quote. But Aquinas adds something crucial. For Aristotle, virtue perfects us according to human nature alone. For Aquinas, human nature is ordered beyond itself. If our final end is supernatural, then merely natural virtues, while real and good, are not sufficient. Thus, Aquinas distinguishes between acquired virtues and infused virtues. Acquired virtues, like courage and temperance, are developed through practice, just as Aristotle taught. Infused virtues, faith, hope, and charity, are given by God and orient the human person toward a supernatural end. Charity, in particular, perfects all the other virtues by directing them toward their final goal. Without charity, even virtuous actions remain incomplete because they lack proper orientation toward ultimate happiness. This brings us to moral reason. Aristotle holds that practical reason, phronesis, or practical wisdom, guides moral action by discerning the right means to the right ends. Aquinas agrees. But Aquinas extends this account by grounding moral reason in what he calls natural law. Natural law is not a list of rules imposed from outside. It is reason's participation in the eternal law. Aquinas says, quote, "The natural law is nothing else than the rational creature's participation in the eternal law." End quote. In other words, moral reasoning is not arbitrary. It flows from the very structure of reality and human nature, because humans are ordered toward certain goods, life, truth, community, and ultimately God. Reason can discern moral obligations by reflecting on what fulfills or frustrates those goods. Here again, Aquinas completes Aristotle. Aristotle knew that reason must guide action. Aquinas explains why reason has authority, because it reflects the order of being itself. Finally, we arrive at completion. For Aristotle, the best human life is one of virtuous activity, supported by friendship and contemplation, within a well-ordered political community. This is noble, and Aquinas affirms it. But Aquinas insists that even the best earthly life remains unfinished. The human heart desires more than political harmony, more than ethical excellence, more than intellectual contemplation of nature. It desires fullness without limit. Thus, Aquinas brings Aristotle's project to its completion. Purpose is clarified as ultimate beatitude. Virtue is elevated through charity. Moral reason is perfected by participation in divine law. And human life is revealed not merely as a quest for excellence, but as a journey toward fulfillment in the highest good. In Aquinas, Aristotle does not disappear. He is perfected. Living well is a skill. Aristotle's case for moral excellence.